Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. I'm glad you're here, and I hope that you'll gain some new understanding and insights to what it means to be trauma-informed and how sharing our sexual assault and rape experiences are an important part of the healing process. This is episode 126, which is part 2 of a 3-part series of my interview with Kaitlin Hurley-Fields and her father, Derrick Hurley. Derrick is the author of Antiguan Justice, A Father's Fight, which is the true crime story about his daughter's rape and their family's struggle in getting justice for Kaitlin. I'll pick up this week right where we left off with last week's part 1. Here's Kaitlin and Derrick.
There's a lot of conditions that have to be met. And I don't know the details. The prison's got to have so much space. The rooms, it's all these things I had no idea about because why would I? Long story made short, this thing goes on, and I'm starting to get upset. And so I'll fast forward. This is 2017 now. So we're a couple of years in. Kaitlin's graduating. So I'm going down to go to graduation. We're going to meet with the police. We're going to get her packed up. So I'm there for like 10 days. It was a good trip, actually. I thought it was a good way to end the time. But I called Commissioner Robinson and said, I'm going to be in town. I'd like to see you. Can we come meet with you? But I really like to meet with the other people. I had talked to all these people on the phone, but never in person other than Commissioner Robinson. We met on a Sunday. I got there Saturday. We met on Sunday at the police headquarters. He called Attorney General on his cell phone and said, hey, Mr. Hurley's in town. He and his daughter would like to meet with you tomorrow. Can you make time? He made time at 1 o'clock. Then he called the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It was on a Sunday. Set up a meeting on 3 o'clock the next day. And the real purpose for me was I wanted them to tell her in person, face to face, they're going to get this done. I mean, they could tell me anything else on the phone. But, you know, in person is a little different. In person, when you say something to somebody, it's got a little more, it sticks a little better, I feel like. And, you know, you committed something. So that they were nice. They looked right at Kaitlin and said, we'll get this done. That was Attorney General. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs was very much the same. If you need anything, let me know. Things aren't moving, let me know. So then what happened is he said, actually, the Attorney General said, we're close. Call me in 2 weeks. Now, I'll just tell you through this period of time, through the whole thing, it was usually call me in 2 weeks or call me in 3 weeks. That's just what it was. There was nothing in between. It was that. So in 2 weeks, I called. I took notes. I have notes from the first call to Corporal Forbes to every call I had. I have a pad with all my notes and all the details. So I had the date and all, wrote it right there when we were sitting there. I call him. He says, I forgot the prosecutor's out this week, so call me in 2 weeks. So make a note, call me in 2 weeks. He says, well, I really don't have anything new yet. We still got to do blah, blah, blah. Call me in 2 weeks. Okay. So in 2 weeks, I called him. This was the third time, so now 6 weeks. And he was upset that I called him this time. It was very clear. He was annoyed that I called him. And he said, look, you know, I don't really have anything to tell you. So how about when I have something, I'll call you. And I said, Attorney General Benjamin, AG Benjamin, that's fine. But I can tell you're annoyed with me. And I just want to remind you, you're the one that told me to call you. So if you're telling me you'll call me when there's something, that's fine, but that's just not what we had agreed to. And I said, so I'll just wait for your call, got off. And right then I'm like, I'll never hear from him again. Yeah. So I immediately called Commissioner Robinson. And I said, Commissioner Robinson, here's what's going on. I said, first, do you know what's going on? He says, no, I just hear they're working on it. I said, well, here's what's going on. And I'm not sure really what to do at this point. I could never get him to call me by my first name, which I prefer. But he said, Mr. Hurley, I think it's time for you to call the embassy. He said, you've got this as far as you can get it. Let them push it over the line for you. And I'm thinking football metaphor. You're on the 2-yard line, let them get it over the goal line. So I said, okay, fair enough. I mean, I literally call him right after that call. And somebody's just taking notes. Like, okay, I'm going to get it to the right person. I'll have somebody call you back. 30 minutes later, I get a call from the embassy, and it's just a younger person, hadn't been working there as long. He wasn't a senior person. And he's kind of blown away a little bit. He said, can you put all that in an email and send it? I need to send this to some people. So I do it in an hour. He had the email. And I think the next day I got a call from a very senior person, William Bent, in the embassy. And he tells me who he is. And he says, look, I've got information from Antigua now. I'm caught up. But before we talk about that, he said, I just need to ask you how you got it this far. And we didn't even know about it. And he said, because we've never gotten anything this far. Then I started thinking, now I know why the consulate said don't call the embassy. And I didn't know what to say, to be honest, because he was very nice and I didn't want to be rude about it. But I thought, well, hell, I'm not going to make up something. I said, look, Mr. Bent, no offense. I'm just going to tell you the truth. I told him what happened with the consulate, and I felt like we couldn't risk it. And I said, but it's worked out, and we can talk about that later if you want to. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Right now, I need your help. Here's where we are. We've been in this state now for a long time, a year probably, and we got to get this prison thing sorted. And can you guys help? He said, let me get on it. And he called me about, it was a little longer than I thought. They had a hurricane in the islands down there somewhere that in their purview, so it tied them up a little bit. But I'd say within 2-3 weeks, he called me. And he said, we have a lady that's with the UK embassy she's really their liaison for criminal stuff in the Eastern Caribbean. And she's getting involved to help. And I think she'll be able to help. I didn't know who it was at the time. I said, okay, well, just let me know. To fast forward it, there was a lady named Sarah Abraham. And she was literally flying from Barbados to Antigua almost weekly, literally with measuring tapes for the sale, all this stuff. She negotiated with the defense to get agreement, even so, based on the terms, he's not even going to appeal if it's approved. She just does all this. It's unreal, because as soon as I hear about her, within a week, she went into a parliament meeting in Antigua, in progress, in session, stopped the meeting to get the prime minister to sign off on the deal. A week later, paperwork's there. A couple weeks, he's back in court. It's signed off on. A month later, he's in Antigua. Wow. September 26th of 2018. That's the highlights of, and it was back and forth. I would just say this. Every time we made a step forward, 2 steps forward, we took 1 step back. Sometimes 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And that was a constant for 3.5 years until we got him extradited. Now it's the trial. Almost no one thought we had a chance at criminal prosecution. From my call to Chris, even to my wife, Corporal Forbes, he told me, he said, we're going to get him, and then we're going to celebrate after we get him convicted. So there's one person that's on board. Kaitlin, I believe, was the only other person, and I know she was just feeding off of me, but I think she felt that we can make this happen. And I told everybody, if we can get him extradited, we will win, because we have the evidence. We have the evidence.
I'd like to ask Kaitlin, from 3 weeks in, which is where your dad started going into the more technical aspects of everything that he did to get the extradition done and the technical process. I want to know, Kaitlin, what's your trauma state through all of this? What is your mental state, and how are you coping with all of this? You're going to school still. You're taking classes. You've got friends who you communicate with, people you trust, maybe some you don't trust, but help us understand what this whole process is from already 2-3 weeks in on while you're trying to finish school.
It was a lot. The program that I was in, first off, was a 3-year program. So we didn't have summer vacation. You were really, really in your studies, which I think for me, especially having gone through all of that, was a good thing to have a constant, to have something I was working towards. So I necessarily wasn't as focused on all the feelings and everything I was experiencing. However, during that time, I tried, my mom and I, whenever she came to visit, we're trying to find somebody like a therapist, a group, anything that I could have for support there, because obviously I have no family. I have nobody that knows me from back home present on the island. We tried calling different numbers. We tried, even on Facebook at the time, there was a support group. Well, we could never get through to anybody. I had no real therapy or anything like that out there, unless it was a couple days between semesters. I would fly home, and we had Helen Ross McNabb in Maryville have a free resource, and it's only if there was no wait list, which there's pretty much always a wait list, by the way. So that was my only real form of therapy during that point in time. While I was there, I had a point where I was just really unable to get past a mental barrier in my head. I think it's whenever we kind of ran into some barriers with the people we were communicating with, and it just felt so overwhelming. Whenever the trauma happened, I was a little bit overweight. I lost 35 pounds in a pretty quick period of time, just from the stress of it all. I lost so many hours of sleep. I was definitely very chronically stressed. I had really bad anxiety and depression. The smallest things could even trigger me. I recall there even being a social event I went to with some medical students one night. And I don't even recall what the conversation was about, but something in that made me feel like I have got to get out of here because I'm going to just freak out. I had to always have a lot of people I trusted around me at all times if I went anywhere other than the grocery store during the daytime. I didn't feel very safe very often. Yeah. Truth be told, nobody really tells you how to work through this initially. You don't really know how you're going to feel. You can watch stuff on TV about it, but in that initial moment and moving forward, okay, this happened, but I have so much unresolved feelings going on inside of myself. I don't know what to do with. And a lot of the time, traditional therapy is not geared towards that. So you really have to find some kind of specialist or somebody that just clicks right with you. And if I'm being fully transparent, in 2024, my dad connected me with a trauma specialist. I don't feel that I really had dealt with everything until this past year. It affected my relationships with people. It impacted my way of just moving forward in general in life. But it is just so wild to me. You don't really know about all the resources because first of all, there aren't enough. They're often not free. They're pricey. People just don't talk about this stuff enough.
If I can just say this, Dave, real quick. You had, even when you got back after 2017, you went through probably 3 different traditional therapists, right?
Yes.
And I'll just close out on the one piece. Because I started working in this space. I just walked away from my career in the last year, and I just try to help survivors and people, and that's all I really do. Someone that's involved in human trafficking told me about this therapist, and this particular, it's a methodology. He's not a psychologist or psychiatrist, anything like that. He knows the methodology that was invented after the Vietnam War to help all the war guys coming back with PTSD. So it's just trauma. And I was struggling. I had my own issues, and so I tried it. And by the way, he charged so much less than I'd pay for half an hour of therapy. I tried therapy. I did 3 sessions. I said, I'm not doing this. This guy, you get into it day one. And after my first session, it's 2-hour sessions, I felt energy. I did a second session, and I felt so good. It's hard when you're doing it, but when you're done, you feel better. After the second session, I said, Kaitlin, how's your therapy going? Because you might want to try what I'm doing because you get into it. And what she told me at the time was, I like my therapist. It's good, but we're not getting into any of the hard stuff. Well, I said, you're going to get into hard stuff the first day here. And I'll just tell you, I did 6 sessions and that's it. And I believe that's all you did. And Jill did, all 3 of us, Jill did it as well. We all did this therapy. Made a huge difference.
It really did. And then also he broke down your anxiety, depression, PTSD, levels. All of mine were very high, as you can imagine. So it's just crazy to think okay, I had lived with these super high levels as a constant for me for almost 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Offline again, Derrick, I'm going to need that guy's name.
Yeah.
I need to contact him.
Yeah, Victor Lyons. I'll send you an email and give you his link and all.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell you, I talk to him regular because I'm like, there's other EMDR, there's all these things. This is one that's called TIR, Trauma Incident Reduction. And it was hard for me to believe what I had been hearing from people in the space. But when I did it, I mean, it had a profound impact on me right away. And I'll tell you my levels, I forget the scale where PTSD is. Mine was just below it. Kaitlin's was significantly above it because we talked about after she got her assessment. But it brings them all down. And Kaitlin's came down way below the line. Mine went down further. You're never going to get it to nothing. It's just not. But, I mean, I'd say it was an 85% improvement on the issues I was having from where it was at least. It was huge. Yeah. And it didn't even take that long. I can't even really understand how it was so effective, but they have an 89.6% success rate to get you below the lines and reduce it. I'll send it to you though.
Yeah, he would be an amazing guest for the show. I think other people need to hear this.
He's good. He's good. Anyway,
Kaitlin, I want to go back to you. You've given us some really great information about that whole process that you went through, the trauma, living through that day by day. What were your grades like? How was your interpersonal reaction? Well, let's ask these one at a time. What were your grades like as this progressed? How did it impact your school?
Well, Schooling, I was a very good student. I was honors level. I really wanted to do what I came to do and show up for myself. And I knew that this happening for me, as I was like, he's already taken a lot from me. I'm not letting him take this. Like, I am getting this done.
What were your coping mechanisms?
Looking back, I would say they were very little. I think that what was big for me was, for one, even though I didn't have like my core people from back home with me, I've always been a people's person. So I had some really good friendships out there that were super important in helping me work through things. Even if they didn't know what was going on, they were people that showed up for me. So I had a really good group with that. I think exercising was really important for me as well, and being outside. I could not stand to be inside for the life of me. Even if I was at the place I had moved to the second year, I always wanted to be on the porch. I wanted fresh air. I wanted to not feel like I was confined. So that was extremely helpful as well. I do think that having clinical rotations at the hospital and clinics was really good as well for me. Interacting with new people, taking care of other people, I think helped me through a lot. I did have a cat there at one point in time as well. It's like my little emotion support cat. Just showed up at my cottage the second year. So Toby was very helpful through that as well.
That's great.
Yeah, that was all good. But I do also just want to say that during all this time, with everything that's going on with the court process and whatnot, I was really not supposed to talk about any of that with anybody around me. Very, very few people knew what I was experiencing while I was there. I had a roommate who I was close with that I moved in with after I got out of that apartment. So she was probably the most up-to-date person on what was happening. For the 4 years from the time that everything happened to the trial, I pretty much could only talk to my family about everything. I didn't have that ability. I didn't feel like to go and tell, and not that you really want to necessarily, but for certain relationships, you'd think it would be beneficial, but I could not compromise what we were working for. So I didn't feel that I could go talk to many people.
It's a good way to say it. Dave, if I can just expand on it just quickly, is I talked to a lawyer in the UK and I talked to one in Antigua, and both of them separately said, do not talk about this. You don't want this in the press. UK press is hard, and we don't want to jeopardize the extradition. Even for us, we told one other couple that we knew would not talk to anybody, and we told one of Jill's, her aunt, because she was going to have to help us some. And Kaitlin was kind of the same. And so we all held this in for 4 years. I don't recommend it.
No.
I would have done it different now. People ask me this, one of the biggest questions I get when they hear that. I would have told at least a few other people that I knew would say nothing, but I'll put it this way. We were working way too hard, and there was too much at stake. I wasn't going to screw it up by letting it out. I was just worried to death.
Yeah.
And I think when she said it better than I did about we didn't want to compromise what we're working for.
Yeah, it was very difficult. 4 years of not really talking about something that's really hard and weighing on you, it's rough. And then on top of that, we could maybe talk to each other about things. You also feed off of each other in a way. Because I knew he was having secondary trauma to my trauma. And so, it's almost like we had to be really aware of what we were going to say to each other at certain times. Because I'm like, I don't want to make him upset, make him feel any kind of way, and vice versa. So it was a little bit complicated.
Tricky.
It sounds to me, as I listen to you both going through these thought processes and remembrances, that you were both, and probably the whole family, intuitively savvy about stuff that, as you look back now on, do you wonder, wow, how did I do so well? Because there was some amazing responses that you had as you're describing all of this that were both uplifting trauma-wise, but also very safe in the legal process. I just wonder if you commend yourselves enough for those 4 years. It sounds horrific, but wow, what an amazing job you all did.
It was tough. Here's what really got us in not the best place early on is when we started researching this. You think you know stuff, and you find out you don't know anything. Right. The statistics in 2014, so we're in 2015 looking at 2014 statistics. I saw this available. And this is U.S. statistic, to be fair. Usually it's similar in other places, maybe worse in other places. But for a sexual assault, it was 0.6 of 1% of people went to prison.
Yes.
This is why so many people thought nothing was going to happen.
Absolutely.
Statistically, it's not going to happen. Right. And we're dealing with that with a country that's never extradited. It's such a minuscule odds. I couldn't put myself there. I just couldn't until everything was exhausted.
These are the statistics that I teach. I knew that statistic right off. I can tell you it hasn't changed from 2014 till now, 10 years later. The problem is that we live in a rape culture in this country, but not only in this country, it's a rape culture worldwide.
Everywhere.
And that rape culture says you don't talk about this. You don't expect any type of prosecution or even good investigation. When I hear that there's a good investigation, I, as a former detective, go, wow, that blows me away, because that's not common.
And to be fair, it wasn't necessarily a good investigation. I mean, not to be critical, but it wasn't. Honestly, it was the text messages that Kaitlin saved was huge. The medical report was huge. It wasn't a he said, she said. There was other things. The he said, she said is what makes it so unfair in prosecuting these crimes, because it could happen and there's no evidence to support what they said, and not get a 12-person jury to convict somebody because he says this, she says that. What else is there? So that's why I knew if we could get there, we had a chance.
And I'm a former detective, but an instructor and educator now. I say this all the time. There's no such thing as he said, she said, if you're doing the investigation correctly. If you're trauma informed, if you know the neuroscience of trauma and how the brain reacts and the neuroscience of memory, there's no such thing as he said, she said. And I could go into that with you folks ad nauseum as to what should be done in these types of investigations.
Yeah.
I also want to talk to Bessel van der Kolk, MD, has written a book that I wonder if you've heard about. I talk about it a lot on my show, called The Body Keeps the Score.
I've heard of
it.
Yeah, it talks a lot about the trauma and what trauma does, not only to our brains, but our mind. And I separate those two, even though they're interrelated. Your brain is an organism that reacts certain ways to trauma. Your mind is the thought process that the organism produces that reacts to that trauma. What I'd like to ask Kaitlin is, what has been your healing process through all of this over the past 10 years? You said that even until just a year ago, you weren't facing much of what the trauma had produced. Help us understand where you're at with that.
In this moment, I'm definitely the best that I have been in all this time. Getting through Antigua, even though we're talking about the down moment right now, I did have quite a few high moments. I had a lot of really great relationships. I love the island. I love it. I love the people there. It's nothing about Antigua. It's just about the person that I had that encounter with. I think there was something about being there in a way that was healing. There's like in nature, I feel very connected. And I felt like I had a lot of great experiences out in the ocean, on the mountains. I felt like I needed to move my body, be outside. That was very healing for me. With the kind of trauma therapy that I had done this last year, I think that if I had had that a lot earlier on, my life would look a lot different right now. Because the way that trauma was impacting me, I was hypervigilant a lot. I feel like my decision-making was not as clear-cut as it could have been. I feel like my self-esteem and self-worth was less than zero. So that's not something that you can build up in a day. You have to actively work for it. And with, I think, initially being abroad and in school and whatnot, I think I had to stay so focused on getting my degree that I didn't necessarily work on myself other than just getting my body outside and moving. Coming back home was really good, except you go from living somewhere for 3 years and you feel like back home is kind of like in a snow globe, like nothing's changed, but you come back and it's like all things are different. Like my friends that were here weren't here anymore, and relationships were different, and all sorts of things. So I felt like I had to re-navigate my life back home, reestablish new friendships and whatnot. And in the meantime, I'm also trying to study for the NCLEX here. I feel like I had a hard time in terms of initial good judgment. Some relationships I had along the way, as soon as I came back to the US, probably weren't the best due to not dealing with the trauma that I had gone through. My self-worth was very, very low, if not non-existent, for a very long time. I did go into traditional therapy. I did that with a couple of different therapists for a while. And while it probably benefited me to some extent, we mentioned before, like we didn't really deep dive. I think that really until this last year, it was more about the people that I was around. I think having a really good support group is super important because, even whenever I had initially gone through things in Antigua, they're a big part of what got me through all of that. I don't really know anybody that's survived this that has not at some point in time had suicidal thoughts and felt, wow, this is so horrible. I can't unzip my body and throw it away. During those times, I just kept thinking about my family. And I thought, if I can make it through one more day and I can talk with my family, and I always try to give myself a reason to keep going until things got a little bit easier. Progressively, eventually they did get easier, but it takes a toll on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would really love to talk about some of the trial stuff next time.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. But like last week, this captivating story isn't over. Tune in next week for part 3, the concluding episode of Kaitlin and Derrick's experience of getting justice for Kaitlin. Thank you for being a part of this podcast audience. My hope is that you're becoming more educated and aware of what it means to be trauma-informed. It's part of my ongoing effort to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault, and to provide a platform to help in the healing process. You can do your part too. A good way to do this is to start by believing whenever someone reaches out to you to tell you their story of interpersonal violence, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. Also, please remember to give a rating for this show and to subscribe to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. It's another way to help bring justice to victims and survivors. Be sure to tell your friends, neighbors, colleagues, and family about this amazing episode, and be sure to tune in next week for part 3, the powerful conclusion of Kaitlin and Derrick's interview. You won't want to miss it. Thank you again for being here. We'll see you next week.